This is the perfect right after lunch presentation that we have. Jonathan Collegio is going to be making a presentation to you. I would encourage all of you guys to really stay focused on this. These are findings on consumer perceptions related to vehicle ownership in the area of autonomous vehicles and ride sharing. Jonathan?
Thanks, Paul, and good afternoon, everyone. Now, I know what everybody's thinking, right? This is another one of these panel discussions on the future of autonomous vehicles and electrification. That's actually not what we're going to do today. What we wanted to share was some new research that we commissioned from NADA, commissioned research with actual consumers. These are the people who will actually decide whether these innovations of autonomous vehicles and personal vehicle ownership, how they will impact and change our world. And we're sharing this because it cuts against a lot of the conventional wisdom that we've seen come out of Wall Street and Silicon Valley in the last few years. And what is that conventional wisdom? I think we've all heard it. It's the idea that there's going to be this convergence between electric vehicles and autonomous technology and ride-sharing services that's going to challenge the personal ownership of vehicles. We've seen this come up in a number of studies over the last several years, and it's beginning to be taken as gospel in many quarters of the automotive industry. So at NADA, we went about this approach a little bit differently. We talked to real consumers about autonomous vehicles. We wanted to understand their perceptions of the technology, their priorities, and their expectations for the future of transportation and how it actually impacts their lives. We also wanted to see if many of the theories coming out of Wall Street and Silicon Valley actually resonate with real consumers on the ground. So, I gotta get this thing on. So we surveyed 1,200 consumers in March. It was a national survey, and this included an oversample of millennials. Because there are a lot of questions that we have about millennials, how they, if they think and act differently on these types of topics. They've grown up in an entirely different world than the rest of us. The ideas of electrification and concepts like, automation and artificial intelligence are not alien. They are actually expected by this generation. They view them as an inevitability. So what did we find from the research? Well, the first big research with 1,200 consumers that we had nationwide with an oversample of millennials was that only about 1 in 10 of any of the car owners in our survey were interested in giving up their personal vehicle in order to adopt a ride-sharing service. And we asked this question even after presenting the strongest possible arguments about why autonomous vehicles were more safe, how ride-sharing would be widely accessible, and how it would benefit their lives. Even when accounting for all of these different benefits about how they're safer than human-operated cars, the vast majority of consumers still wanted to own and rely on their own vehicles. And this result was overwhelming among all demographics, age groups, income levels, and education levels. Okay, so no desire to really get rid of their cars. We also found that another idea that's often bandied about, which is the idea that a car is kind of a cost drag or a nuisance to own because you're only using it a small fraction of the time. This idea is just not resonant with consumers at all. Only 6.5% of consumers in our survey believe that owning a car is a nuisance or a hassle or any kind of car, cost drags. Because average people don't measure the value of their cars like that. They don't think about it strictly in terms of dollars and cents. But we're going to get more into that a little bit later. So consumers like their cars. They have no interest in giving them up. They don't view them as a nuisance or a cost drag. And this is true among all demographics, all across the board. Which brings us to the second major takeaway, which is that millennials, when it comes down to it, really aren't that different from the rest of us. So we oversample millennials, and here's the thing, if you talk to anyone about millennials, you're gonna hear the story about someone's nephew, who's 24 years old, doesn't have a driver's license, rents out the garage on Airbnb and, shares a bicycle, right? Everybody knows somebody like that, or they've heard a story like that. So our question was, is this something that is unique to the generation of people born between 1982 and 2000? Or is it just a youth thing that keep kind of, you cycle through over time? Do people grow out of it, basically? So our survey oversampled millennials so we could parse them out and see exactly where their priorities were and their expectations and how they differed from the rest of us. And we found that only 1 in 5 millennials were actually interested in giving up their car. Not surprisingly, we found that the millennials who were most open to this were younger, on the younger side. Remember, we were talking about this is a generation that spans 18 years. So this is the younger set, the more urban set. But perhaps more importantly, we found that millennials who were similarly situated but lived in the suburbs or lived in rural areas were 6 points less interested in ride-sharing exclusively than their urban counterparts. This puts their attitudes just as close to the rest of us as their urban millennial counterparts, all right? The big takeaway here is that the willingness to give up personal car ownership is more of a youth-driven view than something having to do with the millennial Gemeinschaft, right? It's something that people grow out of over time. And as the population matures, especially as they get jobs outside of their immediate living circumstances and they start forming families, owning a vehicle becomes more and more attractive to them. So we drilled down a bit, right? People clearly don't want to get rid of the cars. Is this a personal preference? Is it a fear of the unknown, or is there something more durable going on here? Is there something fundamentally desirable about owning a vehicle that these consumers are telling us about? So first, I wanted to look at some of the assumptions from a lot of the research that we see coming out of Silicon Valley and Wall Street on this topic. So this is a think tank in Silicon Valley. They say that the principal metric of the conventional auto industry over the last century has been vehicle units sold, not how efficiently they were used. The key unit of measure will be miles traveled. Okay, so that's a Silicon Valley think tank. The focus on miles traveled and cost savings. Here's one from Wall Street. Your car is arguably one of the most underutilized, polluting, time-consuming, and dangerous machines on Earth. We have an invested capital base equal to $20 trillion sitting on the side of the road, in your driveway, in a parking deck, at a car dealer, just waiting, rusting, leaking fluids. All right, so that's from Wall Street. Lots of focus on the cost of ownership and the idea that the fleet could be more efficiently used if fewer cars were operated more. So we wanted to know whether these concepts resonated with real consumers. First off, is miles traveled really the best measure for thinking about whether or not ride-sharing is going to benefit a consumer? That's the fundamental assumption of a lot of the research out there, right? Well, maybe it is. But maybe it's not. What if you had relatively few miles traveled, but you took a lot of little trips? Is ride-sharing beneficial for that person? Few of the research reports out there tackle this question, but the number and ease of a consumer's trips is critical in this calculus. Here's why. According to the Federal Highway Administration, the average US household takes about 10 trips per day. Okay, so depending on the household, 2 to 4 of those are going to be commuting trips. The rest of these trips are incredibly mundane. Okay, we're talking about trips to the grocery store, to the gym, picking up a prescription, taking the kid to school or to sports practice. These trips are so mundane and you take them so for granted that you're probably underreporting them in the survey. So consider for the moment a very mundane but incredibly realistic scenario for an average family. All right, spouse 1 takes about 4 trips, right? Goes to work, comes back, picks up the dry cleaning, comes back. It's 4 trips, about 17 miles, okay? Spouse 2 takes the kids to school, runs to the pet store, goes home, goes to the gym, goes home, goes to pick up the kids from school, drops one off at a friend's house, goes to the grocery store, picks them up, and then comes home, all right? That's 10 trips and about 20 miles, okay? Now, I'm not going to lie. This is actually a scenario in my house a while back. I'm spouse 1. My wife is spouse number 2. Now, I drove about the same number of miles as my wife did that day, but she took 10 trips while I only took 4. So let's drill down on what the scenario would look like if she had to exclusively ride share, okay? So she's got to get into an Uber with the kids in the morning, trying to figure out how to use a booster seat and a seatbelt that she's never used before. Oh, by the way, it's autonomous, so there's no driver there to help her figure this out, right? Then she takes the kids to school, goes to the pet store, all right, goes home, goes to the gym, goes home. Here's where all hell breaks loose, okay? She goes to pick up the kids from school, all right? She's got 3 kids with her. They're too small to stay at home. So she picks them up. Then she has to take another one of the kids to a friend's house. All right, she's got materials for this school project that he's working on, right? So she's got to bring that. She has to bring the kids, figure out the car seat thing again, drop the kid off, take everybody inside with the materials because she has to go talk to the other mom, okay? Does that, gets the kids again in the car, waits for another ride, goes to the grocery store, gets the groceries in bags, right? Waits for another Uber, has to figure out the car seat thing again, gets the kids, little ones, back into the car, waits for another Uber, goes to the house, picks up the kid, talks to the mom again, gets the materials, bringing the groceries into the house, all right? Waits for another Uber, does the whole thing on the way home, okay? You just took something that was already a stressful afternoon for a mom with 3 kids and turn it into the 8th circle of Dante's hell, okay? I mean, I would not wish that scenario upon my worst enemies, let alone my wife, all right? But this is the assumption that many of the reports on Wall Street and Silicon Valley are making. They're assuming that the consumers are going to enthusiastically sign up for this. But the fact of the matter is that the data just does not bear that out. Anyone who has the resources to own a vehicle would simply not undertake a hassle like that. 90% of the car owners in our survey said that every moment that they have their car, it provides them with the independence, freedom, and flexibility where they can go wherever they want to go at a moment's notice. So what does that flexibility look like? 54% of them cited times where they needed to make 4 or 5 trips on the same run and to not have to take the groceries into the gym, right? 28% cited the need to make a trip to another state or another city on a whim. 18% cited the ability to leave an event early and to not have to worry about it, just to have the flexibility to get up and leave something. We see this over and over in our research, even among millennials. Once a millennial gets a new job, forms a family, crosses the threshold of being 30 years old, their interest in exclusively ride-sharing plummets. But the inconvenience actually goes deeper than that. Think about the short trips that folks take. Imagine if your gym or your grocery store is only a mile away and you don't have a personal vehicle. The wait would take longer than the trip itself. And that's where we get really into the crux of the whole issue with ride-sharing. It's wait times. All right, right now, the average household that owns a vehicle, they get in their car and they go. There's no waiting. You're going to go to the gym, you go. You don't have to schedule it. Your car is totally flexible. You can just jump in and go, come and go as you please. But if you exclusively ride-share and you have to wait 3, 5, 10 minutes for one of these rides, folks in our survey reported waiting 9 minutes on average for a ride share, okay? And that's where exclusively relying upon ride sharing breaks down. It's not with the longer, predictable trips like your commute that you can schedule that these reports focus on. It's with these shorter, mundane trips, the ones that you take for granted that are so mundane that you can't even remember them. That's where not having your own vehicle takes away your freedom, your flexibility, your convenience, and your control, and makes even the smallest, most mundane trips an intolerable hassle. So I want to be clear here because ride-sharing has very, very clear benefits, especially in urban areas where parking is a hassle. All right, there are situations where finding a parking space or finding a parking garage could take as long as the trip itself. And I say this as someone I've spent about $5,000 on ride-sharing services over the last 4 years. So I have a lot of experience in this, and in urban areas, there are a lot of benefits to ride-sharing. But for the vast majority of Americans, getting rid of a personal vehicle would have a major negative impact on their lives. And that brings us to the second issue, which is cost savings. One of the things you see in a lot of these reports is that not having a driver is going to make the ride-sharing services so cheap that people are going to naturally gravitate to it. That's kind of the economic argument. One of these studies says that consumers will save about $3,400 and $3,445 per year by exchanging the cost of a new vehicle for exclusively ride-sharing in an AV environment. That's the theoretical savings that you would get against owning a new car. That's not a used car. All right, and remember, the used cars are about half of all US sales, more for first-time home buyers. So here's the question. Is a customer getting those savings for free, or are there other trade-offs and costs involved here? Remember what I said about 10 trips a day in the average US household? Suppose you had to wait 6 minutes a day for each one of those trips, 10 times a day. You just introduced an hour a day of waiting into your life, all right? So let's do the math. 1 hour a day times 365 days in a year is 365 hours of waiting, divided into $3,445 of savings. $9.44 is what you save in exchange for an hour of your life. All right, who's going to sign up for that? Can I get a show of hands in this room who's going to sell an hour of their time for $9.44? Because I'm not going to do it. I got one. Yeah, I got it, yeah. Got one guy back there. You might sign up for this if you're a student, if you're low income, if you're a Dave Ramsey disciple and you're trying to squeeze a fraction of a penny from your budget, you might do this. But frankly, if we're honest with each other, those folks aren't buying new cars anyway, for the most part. For all of the Wall Street hype about consumer savings, we're talking about saving $9.44 a day for an hour of your time. That's just above minimum wage, okay? So we asked folks, How much is your time worth? How much would you have to save for an hour of waiting? We asked it in the survey. All right. 11.5% of people said that they would need to save $15 or less. That means that 85% of or 88.5% of people in our survey said they'd have to save more than $15 in order to do ride sharing exclusively. All right? And here's where it gets crazy. Half of the respondents in the survey said that they would need to save $50 to add an hour of waiting into their life. 35% of the people in the survey said that they would not take any money for an hour of their lives. All right? Just because there's a theoretical savings in ride sharing doesn't mean that consumers are automatically going to gravitate toward that, because there are other things that they consider. All right? Finally is the question of efficiencies. One of the things you hear all the time is about how the car is only used 5% of the time. We need to get the fleet usage up to 50%, et cetera, et cetera. So one of the questions that we had was, are average people really concerned with this? Is that how they think? As I mentioned earlier, about 6.5% of the people in the survey, only 6.5%, said that they thought that their car was a nuisance or a cost drag, something that was costing them money, rusting all the time. But when one of our customers is at the mall or at the grocery store and their car is sitting in the parking lot, they don't think of their car as like being wasted. They actually consider that they're using their car when it's waiting for them. And that's maybe not operating it in a technical sense, but they are using their car because their car is there waiting for them to be used. All right? A car that is in the parking lot or in your driveway is not the same as a vacation house in Miami that's sitting vacant 9 months of the year. It's totally different. When your golf clubs are in the trunk or your makeup is in the glove box, your car is there for you. Whether you're technically operating it or not, whether it's being driven or not, your car is there for you. And when you boil everything down in our survey, that was kind of the key takeaway for us. People own cars, and they want to own cars because they want a vehicle that is always there for them. Personal vehicle ownership has been, an aspiration of people worldwide for generations because it provides unparalleled freedom, flexibility, convenience, and control in personal transportation. It's the ability to go wherever you want to go, whenever you want to go, with no question asked, no hassle. You just get up and go. If you want to go for a hike, up in the mountains 40 miles away on a Saturday morning and then stop at a random barbecue pit out of the way on the way home and not have to think about scheduling your trip or whether there's going to be an Uber there for your way back, you have that freedom. Your car is there for you. And that freedom has a real value that folks are not interested in giving up. Many of them won't even put a price on it, okay? So the question is then, where does that leave ride sharing? In our research, there was a key verbatim that kind of crystallized the whole thing for us. Why would I want to give up my car when I could just keep my car and ride share? That came from a millennial. And it's a sentiment that came up over and over and over again. People love their cars and they're happy to ride share, so why wouldn't they just do both and layer ride sharing on top of personal vehicle ownership? That's the most likely outcome of the convergence of these technologies. Cars are gradually going to become more and more autonomous over time. That's already a reality. We're seeing it today. And consumers will purchase and utilize their own personal autonomous vehicles and use shared services over and above that foundation. Bottom line, ride-sharing services are going to supplement personal vehicle ownership, not supplant it. This also means that the threat to personal vehicle ownership is probably not going to come from the marketplace. It's more likely to come from the government. Maybe not the federal government, but maybe state and local governments. So here's a statement that Uber and Lyft signed on to in February. Due to the transformational potential of autonomous vehicle technology, it's critical that all AVs are part of shared fleets, well-regulated and zero-emission. All right? If there's a threat to personal vehicle ownership, that's the threat. All autonomous vehicles being owned by fleets and operated by fleets is not something that's going to happen by the market. The government has to be involved for that to happen. So the threat to personal vehicle ownership is more likely to come from state and municipal governments that are prodded by large companies that are promising safety, security, and savings for city dwellers in exchange for transportation monopolies in urban areas. The choice is clear. We can either empower our customers with more choices, more freedom, and more control over their personal transportation, or we can hand over control of transportation to a handful of monopoly-seeking large companies that are looking for monopolies in urban areas. Consumers told us loud and clear in the survey that they value their personal vehicles. They value having a choice. The question is whether we as an industry are going to listen to our customers. Thank you very much.